That's fine. I think it gives it a lot of color.
A lot of authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, like the whole thing that I want to do is like talk to people who are sort of like existing in Web3. Like like it's because it's kind of hard to explain what we do to other people. Like whenever someone asks me what do you do, I dread that question because I do a lot of things, but it always ends up sounding like I play with people on the internet, right?
Yeah, well, and that is kind of what we do. I mean, you've made me a lot of money, but we've also been playing together a lot on the internet.
Yeah, and and
Um,
and I think like the thing
which
is
started with me losing money on one
right.
of
I
your
mean,
projects temporarily losing money.
yeah. I mean, I the thing is, of
Are
course,
we
like
recording or what?
yeah, we are.
Oh, okay, great.
But the thing is that I just see like I'm a pattern guy, right? I like to see patterns in things and behaviors, right?
Hmm.
So I've sort of been seeing this like thing of people like, okay, I'm going full time Web3, right? And you have this like timeline of people like
Yeah.
getting engaged with it, and then they like sort of get successful, and then they get into Web3, and then they get wrecked, right? and
Hmm.
and last time we were speaking, we were looking at that simulation, right?
Yeah.
That we didn't
Yeah.
end up recording,
The
but
prey predator simulation, which was really cool. And if you guys have a chance to look at it on YouTube, you can just look up AI prey predator, and it is really interesting to see.
yeah, and it's like this survival of the fittest sort of thing, right? But
Right.
like one of the big strategies there was like building a herd, right? And like
Hmm.
working collectively, and and that was like really successful. Um, and the thing is like what sort of things happen when you go Web3, right? What's the journey like? What's the difference between like working with a DAO or like a group of people on a Web3 project and like working for a company? Because I think like and what's the difference?
Timeline management, for sure, is different.
Right, it's a lot of self-oriented work, right? But
Yeah.
I think that also like another interesting thing is that like there is a blurring between like work and play
Hmm.
where like most of the things that you're doing because you're interested in them, right? There's no forcing people into jobs.
Yeah, that's true. Like your passion does sort of come a little bit more full circle, and weirdly enough, you end up working more in a Web3 position than you would at like a normal job, right?
Right. And
Because you want to be here, and it's like, so yeah, I mean that's San Francisco startup culture all over, which is why they have ping pong tables and pool tables and free beer time, and like all of that stuff is just to keep people at work longer,
right.
right?
Yeah, and the thing is that when work is not like it's more like a hobby that pays you well.
Hmm.
And with those things you sort of like just want to spend more time doing it, right? Because you're
Yeah.
and it comes to this sense of like reward, right? Because in a like if you have a salary, like completing a project maybe gives you a bonus or something,
Right.
but like being successful in Web3 is really like something different because like it doesn't happen that often, and when it does it's like the ocean like
Yeah.
uh because it's so many people, it's like you get the attention of these like AI. It's not an AI, but it's like a cloud computer of brains that just likes your thing, and suddenly, like, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
really
Suddenly
crazy
it just
experience.
crashes down on you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but like, I want to try to understand like how are those difference, how is that created, and how we can replicate that like in a larger scale, right? And to do
Hmm.
that, I think that like exploring the experiences of people like joining into Web3 and how they got here, I think it's gonna be like really useful for that conversation, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
and and yeah, and like tell me tell me like a little bit about your early story with crypto, like how.
Yeah. So it's actually sort of a funny story that involves a Web 2 business plus like Elon Musk, weirdly enough. Uh, so I had created this like successful business selling a novelty item. It was a flask that looked like an original Nintendo game cartridge, and then I actually developed that quite a bit and sort of flushed it out and made like a pretty good business on it, and then thought that maybe the wave there was sort of dying out for sort of like the retro incentive, and sold that business to some Amazon retailer who still makes money on it to this day. And in hindsight, it was probably a bad idea, but it was more money than I'd ever had at the time. And I remember thinking it wasn't quite enough to pay off my house. And so I talked to my wife and was like, hey, I want to buy 100 shares of Tesla, when it was like, I don't know, two splits ago. And it was like 18,000, or no, 1,800 a share.
Hmm.
Or no, it was $180 a share. That's what it was. And I wanted to buy 100. It was going to be 18 grand.
Right.
And I remember her saying like, "Well, you've never invested before." I was like, "You're right. I've never invested before." It was, and for $18,000, I could like pay for a down payment to get into a Tesla, and then pay the monthly payments for like 2 years for the same amount of money. So like, okay, but I'm gonna benchmark this stock to see if my intuition is correct. And then the next time I have the same kind of intuition, like I'm gonna go full ham.
Right.
And so naturally over the next 4 months, you know,
It ripped.
to start I would have made like, yeah, 10 grand on those shares. And then obviously had I kept them for longer, I would have made an insane amount of money on those shares.
Right.
But alas and alack. Um, so a few months after that, a buddy of mine was at my house, and we kind of do that here, where, well, whatever. It's like when people are in rough spots, like we just, I don't know. I've lived in a bunch of different countries, and so the idea of the amount of space that you have here, um, in like a house, is pretty absurd. So whenever somebody needs space, I'm like, yeah, we get tons of fucking space. You can stay here, you know.
Right.
And he had heard about Ethereum actually in December, November 2016,
Right.
and that was a bummer because like he had a bunch of money from his dad passing, and he like he had wanted to put it in there, but he had the same sort of thing, first time investor syndrome, right? Which I
Uh-huh.
think a lot of millennials had at some point back in that time. It
Right.
was just sort of like, we've never really done this before, like, are we sure we should, etc. But
Hmm.
so I had read about it on Reddit somehow,
Hmm.
and it was just in passing, and then
By the
he
way, by the way, Reddit was such a cool thing. Like,
oh yeah,
I
it was
mean,
great.
just the opportunity to be exposed to all that that was happening, because I also heard about Bitcoin super early because of Reddit, and a lot of like the
Mhm.
main things that like later became mainstream were first talked about in Reddit. I mean, I think really people underappreciate how useful that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. Like, even when I went to sell my business, and this is coming from, so my cousin was like a very successful tech startup. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I remember asking him, because he had never sold a business at that time either. He just
Hmm.
knew, like, in theory. Even he was saying at like $1 billion valuation on his company, he was like, I would look at Reddit first because you get firsthand accounts of people who've actually done it. And like there are some stuff on there that like could be bought garbage,
Right.
right?
Right.
But most of the stuff on there for specific stuff is actually just real people like giving you their little testimonial about like what they went through. And so I actually learned how to sell my business like on Reddit
Right.
because I went around and was like, hey, what did you do when you sold your business? And I found out how to evaluate my company and then who I should offer it to and like all of this
Mhm.
other kind of stuff. But yeah, so I got sort of involved with crypto there actually.
Mhm.
And hey, Will, nice of you to
Hey,
join
Will.
us. Um, and so the background noise here is outstanding.
You got a nice new
Um,
soundtrack there.
yeah, right. She said sorry. We don't care.
That's funny.
But anyway, so yeah, so I heard about it from a friend, and then this was kind of like that second like 1-2 punch sort of thing. Where it's like, you know what, screw
Mhm.
this, like I'm gonna go for it.
Right.
And I had been developing this like pin business, which was like Overwatch related pins with a buddy of mine who was unemployed and a really good designer. And I was like, you know what, maybe I'll get back into the churn, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, I went and was like, all right, I'm gonna put like 12 grand into this. I don't know, something like that. I think Ethereum was $43,
Right.
and it was like just after the main hack that they had. It wasn't really a hack. It
The
was like,
DAO stuff.
yeah, well, it was just after they had the the split with
Right.
Ethereum Classic,
Right.
and sort of the controversy that surrounded that, and then you had parody wallets get locked up forever. That was like a devastating. Was it parody? Was that what it was called?
Oh, there was some guys, yeah, that lucked like I don't know how many millions of dollars of Ethereum within the
It was
smart
a
contract.
ton, yeah, and it was
Dude.
all because of the way that they had set it up. There was a problem with it, and they were like we have Gnosis multi signatures now, but
Right.
back then I
Right.
think parity was like
The
it must
thing.
have been called something else. I can't recall what it was. What it was. It started with a P, but
Mm,
anyway, yeah, they got all locked up,
right.
and like so there was a bit of FUD around at the time, but like I just went full ham, and I'm definitely was one of the guys who like tossed in. It wasn't like all my money, but like I tossed in a fairly large portion of money at that time, just because I liked the idea of a decentralized autonomous business
Right.
where people had the incentive of making money for themselves and managing this business together.
Right.
And it turns out, like, my understanding of it really early on was completely false. And it was so much better than I thought. And then I got to watch all these projects, like, sort of start up because at that time, this is when ETH, it was called ETH Trader
Uh-huh.
on Reddit, or ETH Trader, and
Uh-huh.
like it was a fairly like small crew, and then it got more and more popular, and eventually there was some drama with how it was handled, so it split. Now it's called ETH Finance. That's what most of those people have gone to.
Mhm.
But I was reading Ethereum related stuff and white papers for like
That's
hours a day.
that's back when DC Investor was your buddy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know about Buddy per se, but like we were acquainted and we were involved in the same stuff, which
Oh.
is kind of like interesting to look back on. He sort of got famous on ETH Finance because he would post to Reddit, and he'd post these like really encouraging like hoorah articles to remind people in the middle of like the ICO like
Like like
frenzy.
today?
Yeah, yeah.
Like he
he
was bull
he he
posting.
has was he?
I mean bull post like saying like this is a future, like this is a
Yeah,
way
it's
whatever
just sort of this Magna Carta reminder. Like he has the ability to
to
draw on a conviction
right,
that like
right,
a lot of new investors don't have.
right.
And
Like he really
so
got it, like the value proposition, right?
yeah, yeah, and dyed in the wool too. Like this guy, he'd go down with the ship. You
Right,
know what I mean? Like
right,
I mean, he's not stupid in the sense that like if something truly counter
right,
to the original idea happened, like,
right.
the
He's
guy wouldn't give
convicted.
a fuck.
He's convinced of it, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's like that's an example of like that's another thing about the space. I think that good leadership really rises up to like. There's a really good chance that if you're a good leader, you end up in a position of leadership because people will put you there.
I'm actually surprised that well, like I would. equate the two of you, because my conversations with you are, I mean, here's the difference. He wrote it down for people
Right.
to read, and you're the kind of person that, like, you'll talk with people either in the Telegram chats or whatever and remind them of a much larger time frame. And I
Right.
remember when DC back in 2017 was talking about time frames that were like absurd to me at the time, being in my 20s. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like late 20s.
Right.
And I was like, 10 years. Oh my god. You know what I mean? And you know, that whole thing. And
Yeah.
I have the same kind of vibes from you, where like we got together probably like a year ago that we started interacting, or
Right.
maybe a year and a half. And like it was the same kind of conversations I was having with you, where it was like you said, well, if we make a thing and it's on chain, like even if whatever NFT project we had just developed, or like whatever digital DeFi product we had just developed, like didn't take off immediately, like you were like, well, it's always going to be here for someone to find, even 50 years from now.
Right.
And I thought that that was like a really interesting time frame to sort of like look at, because we saw it in the NFT craze last year, where it was like there was legitimate NFT collectors who were just going back and minting out old 2017 NFTs to such a degree
Mm-hmm.
that it showed up on IT tools or whatever, and then everybody else would be like, sort of start aping in, and all
Yeah.
of those things had on-chain storage, right? They were 8 bitty and very punk esque, and
Yeah.
it was fascinating stuff.
And it gets more compelling over time. I mean, I I think that it's fun to think of it because it sometimes it gets like really tough, right? And then your convictions are tested, but at the
Hmm.
end of the day, like the whole point is that we are and here's where people sort of make fun of the saying that we're in it for the tech, right? And
Right.
it's sort of not true because like there is financial incentives, of course, but
Hmm.
there are financial incentives because the tech is so good, right? It's
Well, and
it's
there's financial incentives in pretty much everything that you've ever done. Like even hobbies to a certain point, like they start to require more and more money or whatever, and then like you get to make this decision of whether or not you're just going to do it for fun or you're going to do it
right.
for money.
Right, and that's one of the things that I sort of find super interesting in crypto, where you sort of can redefine money to be whatever you want it to be.
Hmm.
Like, because in the real world we have like one concept of money, and then everything else is fake, right?
Right.
But there's no reason why we can't have like many kinds of money that we can use for different purposes, right? And like in overall, but like it can be something way more um human friendly. I would say like I would like to coin the term human friendly money where it's like
Hmm.
uh there's a lot of, yeah, because I mean there's no reason. I was thinking this the other day, like if we all had amnesia right now, like we all just
Right.
forgot who we are, right? And suddenly it's like new game. What the fuck? Who are you? Everyone's accounts would be wiped. Everyone's zero, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no reason why we wouldn't all have like some money. Like there's no reason why anyone would have more money than anyone else. But that's just like the start of the game, right? And
Right. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be until somebody went to a bank. If their slate was totally wiped clean, they went into a bank and started messing around with the computers and decided to look up their own, like, whatever their name was, right? And be like,
right.
oh, I have this thing. And then everybody would be like, I want that thing. And
No, let's
it would
let's
kind of
assume
continue
let's
to fester.
assume let's assume like imagine everyone forgot their name, so you no longer can like link up your name to the stuff you own, right? So you have to like
Oh, yeah.
everyone
Oh,
has to
that's
like
trippy.
come together and figure out who owns what, right? Out of everything. there is,
Yeah,
right? You would have to invent new money, basically. Like you have to say, okay, let's start over, right? And how would you
yeah,
start over, right? If you didn't have any clue where anything should be, like who gets to
yeah,
be the pope? I don't know. Like we're all like the same stuff.
The biggest child paedophile you can find, probably.
Oh yeah.
Will popping in just for a second
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
digs.
yeah.
Uh,
Just to hit on that horse.
but
Couldn't
it's
couldn't
true.
help it.
Like, who's the president? Who's the village chief? Like, it's amazing what you're talking about. Is essentially going back to first degree accounting, where what is mine is what I can hold,
Right,
right,
right.
in my hands, or at least protect with my lifeblood. You know,
Yeah, I mean you would fight to the death over it. But then again,
there'd be a lot more violence for sure
right
in
for
this scenario where everybody's like, "What the fuck happened? Who am I?" Like.
right. But what if like with the current tools we could all like just airdrop ourselves a new currency and just pick a job
Yeah,
and but it's just like a clean state like so everyone has like 100 coins. You go do whatever you want. You charge whatever you want for what you're doing, and then you have fun with that. And then what happens, right?
yeah. I mean, like, it's. I think that you would eventually find yourself in the same like conundrum that like
Oh,
every tech company that's ever created anything would be. Like, let's say you do this, like you would still need people to buy into it. But we have that with like USD
no, but
or
what
like
if being
peso and all this
alive,
stuff.
means you're buying into it? Like you get those coins just for being. It's like UBI.
Okay.
So you
So you
buy
get these coins, you know that they have value and you can exchange them for goods.
right, and
Okay.
everyone has a number of the same coins, and then you just exchange goods for like goods and services
Stuff.
for stuff. And then
Yeah.
eventually, what will happen is that of course people will get rich and people will get poor. But the point is that you create this equal opportunity, right, for people to do
Yeah.
that. And the idea with blockchain is that every time that you create a new project, you sort of make that happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like a new token, right? And you can be as fair as you want. You can include everyone if you want. Um, but it allows you to have this way of assigning value that is way more human that just arbitrarily, oh, you were born poor, you're fucked.
Yeah. It's actually one of those things about airdrops, and like just to transition over into that for a second, like airdrops have been around for a while, right?
Right.
And they're like they're natural just sort of parts of this ecosystem, which is so crazy to think about because like I'll wake up one day like when Optimism like had their airdrop, right? And like I was like, oh, that was like 4 or 5 grand that I
Right.
wasn't expecting, you know,
Yeah, and
for just
it's your
being
payment
an
for being
explorer.
here. It's your
Yeah.
payment for participating. Like, and that's the crazy thing where and I think that airdrops are a big piece of the puzzle actually in this conversation. Now you mention it, where like just by existing, you can be assigned value for your actions in the past. So like what people should do is participate in the ecosystem in some way, shape, or form because it lets you have a chance to get an airdrop, right?
This is
And
actually the only thesis against the whole mentality of like new investors that are coming on board and they just want to like buy in and maybe make some money or something like that is sort of like, well, if you actually use that money and interact with stuff, like, keep your risks limited, but still interacting with things and going and exploring and trying out new tools, like that actually would net you more money than just holding
right,
um,
and
over time.
that's 100% true. And the thing is that you don't have to have a lot of money to participate and have questions and ask questions and be noticed, because like one of the first things that just struck with me when I started like looking into crypto stuff is that every project had a Telegram and like socials that you could just go into and talk to people. and like
Hmm.
get your questions answered and whatever. And at first, like when I first started, like I just came out of med school, right? I didn't have any money
Yeah.
to invest in
Hmm.
stuff. So I'm like I was going through it more in an attempt to go sightseeing, right? Like how does this
Yeah.
work? I like to understand things, so I use them to learn like do your first transaction, do your first swap. And back then
Yeah.
Ethereum mainnet was super cheap and then it got super expensive and like people were left out of that experience and a lot of people just complained a lot of because of that. And they were right
Yeah.
because it's super important to have like a playground to
Yeah.
understand. And now that the system has matured and that we have like layer 2s coming on and all these systems, there's actually a lot more to do than before, and a lot more like
Yeah.
venues where you can just come in and meet a bunch of people doing stuff, right?
Right. Um, Apologize to everybody for all the fancy things in the background that are dropping around in my house.
That's fine.
Yeah, no, so it's really interesting too when I remember like the discussion for layer 2s actually started late 2017, actually right before like the big Jan 2018 crash.
Right.
And like and that's so funny to me how when we actually are leveling up like our crypto based technologies like for transaction capability and all of this stuff, this distributed computer that we're operating in, like every time we end up having a network sort of like upgrade, like massively so,
Mm-hmm.
a huge leap forward for like what we can do, we always have this weird drop and it makes no sense. It's like people are like, oh, this is happening, fuck, like that's it, we're done. And I'm just like, you guys have to be kidding me, that's crazy. But it's historic, like it has happened.
There's a
I remember Immutable X, man. Immutable X was like one of the first companies, because they had made this game Gods Unchained, that was like, oh, if we want this to be a truly on-chain game that like people can buy and sell and trade these like NFTs, these 1155s, that like we're gonna need to have a layer 2 solution. We're gonna need to
mhm,
have a zero gas or near zero gas solution. And that's something that's important to understand about layer 2s, right? They're not zero gas, they're
right.
just near zero because they batch them together, and then
Yeah.
every 24 hours or however long it is that they take, they
But
submit
then
it.
you have like Nanodonia and XST, which in essence is steeless.
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
Felis?
Well, that's hypothetically that's what they're aiming for.
yeah, but like
Yeah.
I think that I think that is important to like there's a way to think about because for example, stuff like like what Will mentioned and there's a lot of like other chains out there including like uh risk network like stuff for bitcoin based and a lot of things, right? But like the
Hmm.
key thing in the space is called composability, and that's why I am not.
What does that entail? What does that entail?
Composability is like the whole point of Ethereum is that it's a shared state, right? So
Hmm.
whenever
Right.
you put something on Ethereum, everyone else can have access to the functions and whatever functions you make public, right? As long as it's not
Hmm.
owner only or whatever. So
Yeah.
like the really good protocols are the ones that allow people to use them in any way they want, and
Right.
that includes other protocols including them into their like pipeline. So
Yeah.
for example, Uniswap is the best example of a composable thing where like everyone else is using Uniswap for the liquidity provision because they just make a contract that lets the token be farmed, right?
Hmm.
So like the things that are composable are always going to be better than the things that aren't, and the things that are more composable are always going to beat the things that are less composable given the same like um conditions, because when you have composable things, you have a compounding effect of people working into it. Where, like, if you make a thing that people can make things out of, like, it's like if you make a hammer, people are gonna build all sorts of things with it, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right. Right.
if you make a hammer that can only be used in your like workshop, then it's not really like something other people can use, right? So it's less likely
Yeah.
that it's going to be like massively adopted. And
Right, right. And so with the layer twos, the composability is a key factor because let's say there's only like one node for this layer two, or even sidechain like an alt layer one,
right, and
then
the interesting thing about like layer twos is like, and that's a lot of why, for example, um, like DYDX left their layer two and they're going for a Cosmos chain. The thing is that the layer two DYDX is on is just for DYDX, right? So no one else
yeah,
can
it's
build
just I
something
thought
on.
that was like state channel or something like that,
It's
but
no,
I guess there's a
it's
layer
a
two.
Starkware implementation, but
Right.
it's a layer two like only for DYDX. So in that use case, it makes as much sense to have a like a Cosmos based POS chain as it is to have a like a layer 2 solution. So they went for that. But difference between that and stuff like Arbitrum and Optimism is that those things work a lot more like layer 1 Ethereum where everything is in a shared state, so like people can compose products off of each other, right?
Yeah, whatever happened to optimism? Or no, optimism's fine. Whatever happened to Arbitrum? Like I know that they had a bunch of stuff like going
Arbitrum
on there, but
I'm
Arbitrum
doing
is
stuff on Arbitrum. It's
yeah.
functioning.
Arbitrum is actually currently going this like event they have, and it's a super cool thing that they're doing to like onboard people onto it. Which is basically like a series of events, and this is something that people like mostly everyone who's listening to this could do. Like if you have, they're having it like a series of events that make a swap on their decks and stake here and wrap this and whatever, for people to explore the ecosystem they've built.
and
So,
then like when you complete this
and they're
quests
gonna
or like these
airdrop.
quests,
They're gonna end with an airdrop, and so I should be doing that too.
yeah, actually, yeah, maybe I'll spend my day doing that. Actually,
Yeah.
I mean, I have done everything that you talked about, like on Arbitrum. There was like some this is ages ago, and nobody listening should probably go for this. Back when the Ohm fork craze was
Mm,
happening, which is actually really shocking that so many Ohm forks happened because we actually did like a pseudo Ohm fork. It was incredibly challenging.
yeah.
Like it was not easy. So the idea that Ohm forks just like went and spread through the space, one of which I interacted with was on Arbitrum. I think it was like 0 to Ohm or something like that. Super weeby, like anime style, like just Gambit, right? Um, Outside of Ohm itself, the only Ohm forks that like really took off or were trading at like a like I think people understood eventually that like the underlying reserve currency was supposed to equal roughly whatever the divisible was in the
Right.
treasury, right? It was supposed to do that, and then everybody realized like what a premium Ohm was trading at, and it got a little
Yeah.
dicey, especially with
So, so
the
just to
other stuff.
jump back onto the Arbitrum, I think what you're talking about is the Odyssey Project Galaxy, right?
Yeah, yeah, the Arbitrum Odyssey. Odyssey. They're doing.
That's very cool. The idea that they created that adventure or like
Yeah.
made it an adventure narrative. Like, hey, try all of these things and you'll see.
Yeah,
You know,
and if we don't do that, we're gonna be super pissed about the dollar value of the airdrop those guys are getting. Like, that's something I have to
agreed.
do.
Yeah.
Like I have to do. But yeah, like the point about those things is that first, like there's a lot of ways to like broadly assign value to like hundreds of thousands of people, like in a very frictionless manner, right? If you wanted to do that shit, like it's imagine like a class action lawsuit sort of like settlement type thing, like
Mhm.
you have to mail people checks, right?
Yeah.
Just think about how many other
Oh my
people
gosh.
have to participate in that bullshit. So like 10,000 people get checks, and then so they go and cash them individually.
Oh
op-
yeah.
opposed to like airdropping 10,000 people. Like,
Oh my gosh, huge.
yeah,
That would be a huge money saver. Like even just looking at like a 30 to 50 cent stamp on 10,000 stamps that was sending mail out, and then those people have to spend like petroleum gasoline to like
time.
get to the bank, and then like the ink for signing the back of it, and the money that goes into the paper, and like you start to chalk all of this up, and like when it's nothing for one, but when you multiply it by 10,000, you're like, oh my gosh,
Right.
like this is a lot of money that just went into like getting people their settlement, which could very easily be done with like one of the simplest Ethereum based tools.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and
that's
that,
I never thought about that actually. That's interesting.
yeah, and when people start figuring out like how much energy saved that way, like it
Hmm.
just takes like people to start doing things differently, right? And that's a lot of like the purpose of this thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, well, in that sense, I think we've covered a lot of things. It's been 35 minutes, and the average YouTube thing will not. I mean,
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. Um,
but yeah, I mean,
I don't even, I don't even think I finished my story, but that's cool.
no,
Whatever. Like I'm here now.
let's
Like
let's give it some more time though.
I
Let's
mean, like
we could cut
the
it up.
rest of my
We could cut it up.
story just has to do with like losing a bunch of money and then using crypto to sports gamble to try and make it back when the dollar value was really low rather than doubling down because I was a new investor and like losing money on ICO investments probably the same way that people have been losing money on like NFTs and such, right? Because
Yeah.
it's essentially like the same thing. The difference is like NFTs would be more like membership related, but ICOs were more just like pure speculation on protocols or companies doing anything with it.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that ICOs at the end of the day, I mean NFTs are just a better way of making tokens, and we've proved that.
yeah,
And we
yeah,
have to wait until people like figure out more things to do with them, and like having like
yeah.
the first NFT that really gets mass adopted. Like that's things that are gonna happen, like eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I just love that like it's like NFTs are being used to sort of build culture. And it's really funny that
Yeah.
things are happening now that you and I have on recordings from a while ago, or maybe we were just talking about it here on Gather, but like there is now a site that uses NFT tech to do hotel
Mhm.
reservations. And that was something we talked about ages ago.
Right.
And so one of the things like I see seeing as this culture sort of develops is like and this is something that you and I are developing together is like you're gonna have all of these like membership groups. Like I think of them like villages, right?
Mhm.
Like where it used to be every man for themselves and trying to like make all of this money, or you belonged to an identity of a group of people based on whatever ICO or token that you had.
Mhm.
But now it's sort of like, okay, I have this membership token, and like they're starting to create culture around it. You
Right.
know, you see it with Board Ape Yacht Club, you see it with like creatures and punks, like all of this stuff, right? And
Mhm.
like now we just developed that music based NFT where it's like tokenized music, right? But it was made by like a specific number NFT
Right.
um, for that group.
Mhm.
And I think music is going to start to sort of be like a cultural like establishment too, because cultures have specific things. You know, you
Mhm.
have like your practices that you do. We have NFT New York, and we have LA NFT stuff, and like we're having events, right, that are like our holidays, and like you have like your borders sort of in the sense that like you need to own this NFT, and
Right.
that's how you know you're a part of the village. And like I think you're going to see music, and I think you're going to start to see sort of like people buying projects that were developed by owners of whatever their NFT is. So these little
Mhm.
micro economies developing, and they're going to turn into like little cities. Like all
Right.
of these NFTs that are worth anything, like they're gonna kind of group together as a net worth congregation that like makes shit.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
I think
so
that's really like key. Like I think that there's been a divide in how culture is created, where like we sort of assume that like culture is created by celebrities and that we all
Hmm.
watch, right? But
Yeah.
for example, like everything in crypto is very grassroots, right? In the sense that the really
Yeah.
cool things are the ones that are community first and community creations.
Yeah.
That's a creature you got right there behind you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, she was doing this. Like, that's not a dog. I don't own a dog. It's just my one of my twins just
That's a
deciding that that was a funny noise to make.
th- those are legit creature noises there,
Yeah, yeah.
or
But
goblin
like
noises. I don't know.
goblin noises. There you go. Yeah, I minted a 101 goblin 3 years ago. But an OG goblin.
OG.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, like it is going to be interesting, and I think that sort of like follow up projects are a way to sort of expand your village to like a
Mhm.
larger city, but it
Mhm.
also sort of has this strange caste system, and you see it with like Bored Ape Yacht Club too,
Right.
right? In the sense of like you have Bored Ape owners, and then they always shit on mutant owners, which is like really kind of funny.
Yeah.
Um, and but yet they all still belong to like the same like crew.
Right.
And so like I think we're gonna see that with a lot more projects as things get like more established. They'll start to expand with like you'll have your famous people in your group
Mhm.
that do the music or that do like redeemable food. Like there'll
Right.
be these micro countries
Right.
that like have their own stuff. Like it'll be really interesting to see in the future if they actually have a currency in which they trade with. And obviously apes now have that with the ape
Ape coin.
token, right?
Yeah.
But like what they're doing is not a surprise to me because this is how you establish like essentially an online city or a
Mhm.
web-based city, right?
Right. And that's
Um,
a like that's a really nice thought, and a lot of what like the metaverse is going to look like, because a lot of people think like the metaverse is going to be a game, right? But the
yeah.
metaverse is really like a series of experiences that you have access to. So
Hmm.
like it
Yeah.
can be any number of things, including like NFT New York events. Like
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
all of the things that you've got access to with your identity, right?
Yeah, and think about like any convention that has like 10,000 people going to it,
Mm-hmm.
all with like a certain level of net worth, is still like a pretty sizable event. And like that's not including people that belong to this city, that have that own like sort of like follow up like NFTs and such. So like that'll be really interesting to sort of see like creatures have their own sort of event or doodles
Right,
or like board apes, and like they'll all sort of attend each other's events just like we have comic cons now,
right, right.
right? It'll look differently, and you'll have like your representative group that buys a 10 by 10 booth to like display their national pride. Like
Mm-hmm.
that'll be like a consulate at this weird city event.
Yeah,
And I'm
I like
looking
that
forward
idea.
to seeing a lot of this sort of come to fruition because you know that it will because it's happening now. I mean, NFT New York still went on and the market was down like
Right.
75%,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and the
And
thing
people
is,
were still doing crazy shit.
that like although like you mentioned a couple of things that are like really bad in the real world, like caste systems and things like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Uh, I think that the way they're implemented in crypto, because the thing is that because a lot of what like the more liberal like critics
Hmm.
of crypto will say is that you get the same sort of structures forming, right? Like you end
Yeah.
up having winners and losers inevitably, right? And the
Yeah.
thing is that the cool thing is like the counter argument to that is that even though like individual projects maybe are zero sum games where like maybe the most benefit is early on and people who are
Hmm.
late to the game usually like there's someone who has to lose for people to win within that game.
Yeah.
uh But the thing is that there's so many games going on at the same time that even though that you may lose in one game, if you stay long enough, you eventually end up winning, like, and making it up for everything else because of the value. When you create value, you create a lot more value than what you destroy on average. And then you
Yeah,
and then you add up the whole airdrop thing, which means that if you were interacting with the system, like the likelihood that you will get an airdrop at some point is very very high.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very true. Yeah, I'm looking forward to like we got to get on the Arbitrum thing, and then I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with optimism. Like that was a really cool thing to have like happen,
Yeah,
and reward people for sort of being a part of multi-sigs and going to layer twos and like doing all that stuff.
right.
It'll be cool to see what happens there,
Yeah,
and like
maybe let's play around with it like this week, and we can talk about how it went like next time we do a
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, the next podcast, layer two adventuring. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be cool.
All right.
All right, yeah, that's probably a good time to end it.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna go and upload
Thanks for
it.
listening.
Yeah,
Like and
thanks everyone.
subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Yeah, shout out to Nerd Finance, to Strudel Finance, to who
Yeah.
else? Who else? I'll be shouting out to Stack Labs. Shout out to
Will for the
JB.
comments.
Shout out to Will for monetization comments. Uh, yeah, that's it. I hope you like it.
All
Leave a
right.
comment. See you guys. Bye
See you,
bye.
ciao.